Leviticus is one of the most misunderstood books of the Bible, but it's essential for understanding how Israel was called to live in the presence of a holy God. Right from the start, in Leviticus 1, we see that Moses cannot enter the tabernacle. Why? Because the space around God is holy, and Moses, like all of Israel, is not yet holy enough to approach. Holiness is key in Leviticus. God is holy, and for Israel to dwell near him, they also need to become holy. But what does it mean to be holy? It means to be set apart, distinct from the nations around them, reflecting God's purity and righteousness. Leviticus shows us the process by which Israel can become holy, through various rituals, sacrifices, and laws. The 5 main sacrifices. There are 5 main types of ritual sacrifices outlined in Leviticus, each with its own purpose. The burnt offering, Leviticus 1. This was a voluntary offering, completely consumed by fire, symbolizing total devotion to God. It was a way for the worshiper to express their dedication and surrender to God. The grain or meal offering, Leviticus 2. This offering of flour, oil, and incense was a symbol of thanksgiving for God's provision, especially the gift of sustenance and daily bread. The peace offering, Leviticus 3. This was a celebration of peace and fellowship with God. Part of the offering was consumed by the worshiper, symbolizing communion with God and his people. The sin offering, Leviticus 4. This offering was for atonement of unintentional sins, providing a way for the Israelites to maintain their relationship with God, even when they fell short. The guilt or trespass offering, Leviticus 5. This was for sins that required restitution, meaning if someone wronged another, they had to not only offer a sacrifice, but also make amends by repaying what was lost. The 7 annual feasts. Along with sacrifices, Leviticus outlines 7 key feasts that were to be celebrated throughout the year. These feasts were reminders of God's faithfulness and Israel's calling to be holy. Passover, Pesach, Leviticus 23:5. This feast commemorates the Exodus, when God delivered Israel from Egypt. The Passover lamb was a symbol of the sacrifice that would ultimately bring freedom. Feast of Unleavened Bread, Leviticus 23:6-8. For 7 days the Israelites ate bread without yeast, remembering how they left Egypt in haste and focusing on removing sin from their lives. Feast of First Fruits, Leviticus 23:9-14. This feast was an offering of the first part of the harvest, symbolizing trust that God would provide more in the future. Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, Shavuot, Leviticus 23:15-22. Celebrated 50 days after first fruits, this feast honored the giving of the law at Mount Sinai and the end of the grain harvest. Feast of Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, Leviticus 23:23-25. A day of rest and trumpet blasts, signaling the beginning of the civil new year and calling the people to prepare for the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, Leviticus 23:26-32. This was the holiest day of the year, where the high priest would enter the most holy place to make atonement for the nation's sins. It was a time of fasting, repentance, and reconciliation with God. On this day, the high priest would enter the most holy place with the blood of a sacrificed animal to atone for the sins of the entire nation. This was a powerful symbol of God's mercy, providing a way for the people to be cleansed and restored. Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, Leviticus 23:33-43. A week-long festival where Israel lived in temporary shelters, remembering their time in the wilderness and celebrating God's provision. The role of priests. Leviticus also focuses on the role of priests, who were responsible for mediating between God and the people. Only men from the tribe of Levi, specifically the descendants of Aaron, could serve as priests. They had to follow strict rules about purity and conduct, because they were ministering in the presence of a holy God. Impurity versus sin. One of the key concepts in Leviticus is understanding the difference between being ritually impure and being in sin. Impurity didn't necessarily mean sin. For example, touching a dead body or having certain skin conditions made a person ritually impure, but it wasn't sinful. The laws about purity were about maintaining cleanliness so that one could enter God's presence. However, moral impurity, like idolatry or injustice, was sinful and required not only ritual cleansing but repentance and atonement. Israel set apart. Throughout Leviticus, God calls Israel to be set apart from the nations, to be holy as He is holy. Their rituals, sacrifices, and laws were designed to distinguish them from the world and to reflect God's character. Leviticus ends with Moses calling Israel to remain faithful to God's covenant, a message that echoes throughout the Bible. Finally, when we reach Numbers 1:1, we see a significant moment. Moses is able to enter the tent of meeting and speak with God. This was possible because now Israel had learned how to become pure and approach God's holiness. The system of sacrifices, purity laws, and priestly duties provided a way for them to dwell near their holy God. Leviticus may seem complex, but it's all about how a holy God made a way for His people to dwell in His presence. As we continue through the Bible, we'll see how these themes of holiness, sacrifice, and purity ultimately point us to Jesus, the one who fulfills all these things.